This is nowhere near as bad as the majority of stories I've read on here, but anyway. When this happened, I was 19 in London. My then boyfriend had called me a cab to go home from his place, which is about a 30-minute drive. His car was in the shop at the time. Before I got in the cab, he kissed me and told me to text him when I got home in earshot of the driver. I get in, and the man starts a friendly conversation about what I'm studying. Nothing unusual. But the conversation starts to get a bit personal when he tells me he's from Pakistan and a Muslim. He then asks me if I am too. I'm Iranian, and my family is Muslim, but I don't practice. But I just said yes to not cause any awkwardness. He started to tell me like I looked like a good Muslim girl, and that he wanted to marry someone like me. I became increasingly uncomfortable and noticed he deliberately turned onto a street that would make the ride 15 minutes longer than the usual route. I text my boyfriend saying the taxi driver is creepy, and he replies telling me to keep texting him until I get home, so he knows I'm okay. The cab driver asked if the guy that said goodbye to me was my boyfriend, and I immediately said yes, hoping that would shut him up. He asked if we're serious, and I said yes. He continues saying he wants someone exactly like me. He then locks the car doors. I ask him why he did that, and he says for safety. I swear my mouth was so dry I could hardly swallow. I was pretty scared, but I didn't say anything because he was still going towards my house, and I didn't want to make him angry. He asked me the most disgusting questions, if I was still a virgin, if I had ever done stuff with a man. I refused to answer and kept frantically texting my boyfriend, but the douche had either left his phone somewhere or fallen asleep. So much for being worried for my safety. When we finally get there, he overcharged me, told me he had my number, and that he was going to call me so we could meet. I said I won't because I'm in a relationship, my family wouldn't like that. He said I can keep it a secret. I tried to open the door to get out, but it was still locked and he laughed. He then stared at me intensely through the rearview mirror for what felt like a full minute. My stomach felt hollow and the street was quiet and dark, which made it feel even more creepy. He finally unlocked the door and I booked it to my front door and frantically knocked as I looked for my key. My mom asked why I looked so pale, and I told her. She proceeded to call the cab company to make a complaint, and they admitted he'd done this before and promised they would fire him, and we reported it to the police. But they didn't pursue it since he hadn't harmed me. I'll never forget that night. It was last year. I had just turned 25. I had been to a friend's wedding in another state and was returning by train. I reached the station around 5 a.m. It was freezing as the temperature had hit 4 degrees. All I could think of was getting home fast, so I could sleep for hours after being tired from many nights. I generally avoid traveling alone in the dark, but it was impossible to wait at the station till sunrise because 1 hour seemed like a very long time, so I decided to get a taxi. The distance from the station to my apartment is roughly 40 kilometers. There were 2 taxis, and I got into one of them without making any eye contact with the driver. I told him where I wanted to go, and we started. This man must have been in his late 50s or early 60s. Silver gray hair, big build. I decided to go with this taxi because I thought I'd be more safe with this fellow since he was elderly. It was a mistake. Nearly 15 to 20 minutes had passed. I was looking at the road ahead. There were very few cars and all I could see were trees that were close by and fog covered everything else. Suddenly I noticed that this guy had been staring at me from the rearview mirror, and he didn't blink or look away when I looked at him. It had been over 2 minutes, and he was still staring. He had scary, droopy eyes. I was very uncomfortable at this point, so I used my scarf to cover half my face, which was only covering my neck all this while. This didn't stop him, and he suddenly started laughing like a maniac. Then he said a word in some other language, I believe, so I asked him to repeat it. My heart was beating very fast. "So many people are dying," he said, and he started laughing again. I was too afraid to ask him any questions. I stood there frozen, regretting why I didn't wait at the station. My hands were shivering because I was trying to send a message to a friend, but my fingers just couldn't type properly. He turned around now, facing me, asked me if I was married. I managed to speak nervously. No. And he said, "You will repent." With these words, he started to speed up. My mind was going crazy now. What the fuck did he mean by that? Why would he say such a thing to me? I tried looking around if it was a good idea to get off the taxi, but it was still very dark and there were many cars around. Maybe 2 or 3 cars would pass us every 5 to 10 minutes. By this point, I was pretty convinced that he was taking me to some other place. Maybe he wasn't, but I was too terrified to think straight. I was trembling with fear, and I was sure he was going to attack me or do something worse. Suddenly he slowed down and he seemed to be talking to himself. "People die. You'll die. She'll die." Pointing to the empty seat. With those words, he stopped the taxi right there and asked me to get down, saying, "We need fresh air. And the petrol is over." He wasn't drunk, but he had been hallucinating since he kept blabbering, looking at the empty seat, and was laughing for no reason. Arguing with him could make him annoyed, so I decided to do as he said, until I got some help, or maybe I could stop him in some way by agreeing to all of his demands. I got off the taxi and this guy got off too. Now he was right in front of me, but at a car length distance, holding a lit torch, pointing it on his neck, repeating, "You will repent." I was almost crying due to fear, but running was impossible because I could have been run over by some car due to the fog, and my mind was not working properly by this point. The thought of calling someone didn't occur to me earlier, and now it was too risky since the maniac was standing right there holding that torch and moving his head like some possessed person. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, and his eyes appeared bigger than normal due to the torchlight that illuminated his creepy, now serious face. He said something again which I didn't understand. I was sure he was going to kill me, or torment me before that. I was extremely restless and looking around for help. To my relief, there was a car passing by, and it stopped there looking at us just standing in the middle of the road. The guy came running to me and asked me to go towards his car where his daughter, who was nearly my age, opened the door. The insane cab driver ran back to his taxi and drove off in seconds. Clearly, there was enough petrol. I was still breathing heavily and told them what had happened in the last 30 or 40 minutes. They told me I was in the opposite direction and it was not a safe area since many incidents with girls had happened there already. I was right. That driver was taking me to some other place. They had sensed something was wrong by the way that maniac stood there holding that torch, and that light showed my silhouette more clearly, so they decided to check what was going on. Had they not stopped, I wouldn't be alive to narrate this incident. Since that night, I never traveled alone. Never. I am thankful to those people who saved my life. Sometimes we see many people who say they need help, but we fear it could be a trap, and we don't stop. Had they thought the same, I'd be dead. So this was the incident that still scares me when I think about all those events that happened that night. I don't want to see or meet that driver ever again. When I was 19, I was working in an Italian restaurant, which is a 10 to 15 minute walk from my house. Usually I'd walk there, but if I was running late, I'd call a cab. On one particular day, I called a cab company, and this man picked me up. He was a short, balding 50-something-year-old. He made conversation, and we spoke for a bit while he drove me to work, which took no more than 5 minutes. He charged me a reduced fee, and gave me his card, and told me that if I should ever need a ride to or from work, just call his phone, and he'll get me. Over the next 2 or 3 months, I'd call him, and he'd pick me up to take me to or from work. Sometimes my mother would even call him and use his services because I told her he was very nice and charged a lot less than a regular cab. But of course, nothing can ever be nice and innocent. The next few times he picked me up, he'd tell me how beautiful I was and that he wishes he had a wife like me. I just did that fake laugh anytime he'd say it, and I didn't think anything more of it. Before we get to the next part, I know that I was incredibly stupid for allowing this to happen. I've learned my lesson. One night around 6 to 7 p.m., he picked me up from work and said he was hungry and that we should go out to dinner. I told him no, it's okay, I would rather just go home. Instead, he gets right on the highway the opposite way to my house saying that we're going to get dinner. I'm internally freaking out. I text my friend and let her know what was going on. I did not want to text my mom because I irrationally assumed she'd be pissed off at me for some reason. He pulls up to a Thai restaurant that's on this little strip mall area. And I'm like, okay, his intentions aren't bad. It's okay. I actually go and have dinner with him. After dinner, he hands me $100 and tells me to go buy something nice, while he buys a button down at some Banana Republic store. At this point, I'm like, what the fuck? When he comes back out, I hand him his money back and demand he take me back home, and he obliges. It's a really awkward ride because all he's talking about is how pretty he thinks I am, how he really wants a kiss from me, how he envisions a woman like me being his wife. As he pulls up to my house, he asks if my parents are home. All the lights were off, but I said hell yes and he seemed to buy it. Not before asking me for a kiss though. I said no thanks, and he tries to pull my face into his, and I push him off and ran into my house. I never told my mom about this, but I did call the cab company and spoke to the manager, who told me that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and that he would be taking care of it. I got calls from this man a couple of times after this incident, but they stopped after I changed my number. Luckily, nothing more severe happened, but that sure as hell was creepy, and I should have demanded he take me home as soon as he hopped on the highway.